You're all set.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Planning Committee of the Common Council. I'll call this meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. Roll call with us. I'm just going to call your names out who I see. Mr. Keegan, Ms. Smith, Ms. Shanahan, Mr. Livingston, Mr. Sirenides, and myself, John Kites, missing one member, Ms. Young, who should be joining us shortly. Okay, and the first item up is the approval of the minutes, September 2nd, 2021. Would someone like to move those? Thank you, Mr. Keegan. Any corrections to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hand and signify yes. No abstentions? I'll let the record show Ms. Shanahan is abstained from the votes. Okay, and I am in favor as well.
And John, sorry to interrupt. Ms. Young just joined us.
Oh, welcome, Darlene. Let the record show Ms. Young is with us. And first item up, actually, first something I'd like to do before, like I had mentioned before, I need to be step out at 7:45. I need to leave this meeting. Mr. Sirenides will be taking over at that point if we're not finished with the agenda. And to that, I'd like to move up, if there are no objections, the item D. I'd like to make a motion to table that to the next meeting. Jessica Casey is unable to join us, and I actually personally would like some more information about this before I move forward. So I'd like to, like I said, make a motion to table this item to the next planning committee meeting, item 2D1. All in favor, please raise your hand to signify yes. No's, abstentions. So Darlene, are you in favor?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. The motion passes unanimously. Okay. Now we're going to backtrack to item 2A1, discussion of draft industrial zones report. Mr. Kleppen, I believe you're with us to discuss that item.
I am there. I think there's 3 items you wanted to go over. I can take them in any order you prefer.
Well, we have that in the update on the industrial zone and waterfront study. So I know they're very connected. So if you feel free to discuss and give us your overview on both items together or separately.
Okay, I have a presentation for the industrial zone, so I'll do that, and then we can discuss waterfront after if you'd like.
Sounds good. Are you able to share your screen? Oh, there you go.
It actually works, so that's good. Just get it into. All right, that's everybody can see that nice and clearly. I'm assuming yes. Okay, so I think you guys got a copy, and John, and just for clarification purposes, John and Darlene are both on the committee that looked at the study. So everybody got copies of or an email link to this last week. So hopefully you had a chance to at least browse or go through it a little bit, but it's a draft report dated September 21st. So kind of the key takeaways, these are, and I'll go, I guess, got a short amount of time, so I'll go as quickly as I can. Some kind of high level key takeaways. And these are things that came up prior to the study was, defining the different types of industrial users, not every one size fits all. And also looking at the types of contractor yards, and very similarly with that, not one size fits all with them either. You have large earth moving operations, which tend to be disruptive to residential areas. And then sometimes you have, an individual who's got 3 or 4, electric vans and has, a few crews that show up to a site. And so there's much different impact on the area between those 2 different things. Another big part of this was looking at the existing boundaries from the zoning districts related to the industrial zones and where they currently exist versus maybe where they should exist. So we recommended some changes there to right size that. And many of these areas are proposed to be downzoned. So in order to do that, how do we get them to change their existing use from something that maybe not be the best for that given location to do something that's has a betterment for the neighborhood, and maybe it's something that can also be job generating. So there's some incentives built into the proposed zoning that will go along with the plan.
Hey, Steve,
And yeah.
excuse me, when you say down zone, you mean to make it more restrictive or what do you?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And also, with the industrial zones, and particularly with the contractor yards, comes, the issue of enforcement and screening and how they actually look from the street. So there will, the plan recommends, taking a hard look at, what we require for screening now. Should that be beefed up? Do we require more things in terms of aesthetics or streetscape things that could maybe help some of these uses blend into the neighborhood more and not stick out and be a detraction?
Steve, sorry to bother you again. With contractor yards, there's both the physical appearance as well as the additional traffic it brings to neighborhoods. Is that being addressed here as well? I mean, when you look at what a contractor yard does, it's not just the way it looks, it's also this disruption to the neighborhood.
Yeah, so when you, as part of what we're going to call the right sizing, or, and I can get into that in a little bit more with some of these slides, but when you disallow certain uses from zones that they're operating now, eventually over time, if the use changes, it should go to a use that's less conflicting with the neighborhood. So ultimately hopefully there'll be less noise, dust, and also it might be also the types of vehicles that are coming in and out of there. So that is one way that it could reduce that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the kind of the beginning of the study, it recommends reclassifying our industrial uses into kind of 4 categories. And the chart on the left-hand side there kind of indicates the zones where those classifications currently fit and where they may line up with the rezoning. So there's kind of a heavy industrial, which might be your, large earth processing yard. Maybe it's O&G, or it's where LaJoy's Auto Wrecking is, or one of the transfer stations. That's kind of your heavy industrial. Then you kind of get into 2 categories that are somewhat similar, but they're a little different in terms of their location and their character, where we're reclassifying into what we're calling industrial 2, and where the along the Route 1 corridor might be a little bit different, but could also have some of the same characteristics. The last category is kind of a mixed use artisan, and those would be something like you might see in like a brewery or a small fabricator or manufacturer, things that we're already trying to encourage in areas like West Ave, Wall Street, Sono, and those kind of things, where they can kind of blend into the neighborhood and they fit into the fabric of what's there or what could be there. So this is kind of taking that classification system and mapping it. On the left is the existing zoning for the areas that were classified as the kind of the industrial zones, and on the right breaks down them by classification. And it doesn't necessarily always line up by what we'll see in the zoning, but it's pretty close. I'll point out a couple things just for clarification purposes. This area where this black outline, you'll see the areas within that parcel, all the parcels within that are not color coded. Those are right now a lot of industrial 1 properties or marine commercial properties. Those are the properties that we're looking at in depth in the waterfront study. So we kind of just said, all right, hands off, we'll leave those alone and deal with them after. 2 other items to point out on this map. The Norton Site, it's really kind of unique and special. So it kind of needs its own little thing. What that turns out to be, I really don't know. Ideally, we would get an applicant that came in with some uses that lined up with things that would be more preferable to the neighborhood, unlike the distribution center package that we had proposed to us earlier this year. And it's kind of recommends looking at this now or in the future. The other piece over here is the Lakota Oaks property, and I think it's kind of a stymied property in some regards, because every consultant that's seen it on the map goes, we really don't know what to do with this, because in many cases, it's kind of its own unique entity. It functions in a nice way for the neighborhood in terms of the kind of like almost open space quality to it. So we're trying to come up with a way to kind of keep it so it can function and operate accordingly, but not turn into something that would completely cause upheaval in the neighborhood. as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're looking at a few things to try to incentivize some different kind of development on some of these properties. One thing that the consultant identified pretty early on was that the modern kind of industrial / manufacturing, they need a taller ground floor. So what they're recommending is for, this is one example on the left where they're saying don't increase the number of stories that you currently allow, but increase the allowed height so you can get that ground floor use. And on the upper floors, look at things that can help cross subsidize that ground floor commercial space. And that could be anything from office that's separate from what's on the ground floor to office supportive of what is on the ground floor, and then residential in cases, through special permit, but not at a very high density. We're not looking to turn this into, a solely residential development. We understand that the more density we put in means the more residential density we're going to get, because that's what moves the market the most. So we're just looking at ways to help subsidize that ground floor commercial space. So, obviously when you say you're going to increase the height, there's concerns about what are going to be the impacts when that's in proximity to residential areas. So there's some tools that we've talked about as part of the process and that we'll develop further when we put the draft zoning together to deal with those, those potential issues. So the diagram on the right shows kind of what your eye sees and what your eye perceives if you step back the buildings accordingly. So the height isn't necessarily always a deterrent or a detraction, provided that the code is in place to deal with those heights and keep it at a kind of a pedestrian friendly height in proximity to those residential properties. And this is, we're going to get into a little bit more specifics about some of the recommendations related to the rezoning itself. The picture on the figure on the right shows some areas that are classified and proposed for some of the different classifications, whether it's more the heavier industrial or the light industrial. And the pictures on the left show some examples of kind of newer developments that have incorporated those taller ground floor buildings. There's obviously examples from Boston. We have pulled some from different areas of the country, California and Massachusetts as well, to look at areas that kind of think we could potentially fit in here. Does this mean that all these areas will redevelop in this fashion? No, but we want to provide the tools and ability for somebody that sees this as an opportunity and is interested in Norwalk. So as part of that, before we just say, well, that's great, let's just put in some taller buildings with taller ground floors and build it and they will come. The consultant team went back and fit tested these concepts on some different sites. So the diagrams on the right show some potential build outs with different lot sizes. And, obviously one of the largest constraints on development of any kind is parking. So every use requires parking, and the more parking required means the more surface space that you'll probably need to deal with and to accommodate on your site. So the upper figure shows a smaller site with obviously a smaller building. So it's got like a 1.5 story building. And on the bottom, you'll see a larger footprint, a similar size footprint with more upper stories. And obviously the larger lot can support more parking. And so we asked them to take it a step further and look at some actual lots in the city and what this kind of could translate to in terms of development potential, not only from the size of the building, but also in terms of kind of like potential employment and the kinds of industry or job growth you might see there. So in the Appendix C, it's actually Appendix C of the plan, it runs through a couple different scenarios. So they looked at, they took this lot, they placed the building on it, and they ran the numbers basically on, the type of floor plate you could add, what you could potentially conceive of for upper stories, what that would require for parking on the site. And so they laid out, hopefully you can see the parking, it's a little faded in here, but the parking is laid out here, and the parking is laid out in other areas. And then they looked at if you had certain types of uses in there, what what kind of jobs might come along with that, and what are the potential wages for those jobs in comparison to some other things that you might see in the area. So looking at the, more specifically what the recommendations come down to is, so obviously one big concern is, and this will definitely rise up in South Norwalk, is contractor yards, and where should those contractor yards go? So, and I'm going to show you the maps in a little bit that show where the new boundaries are proposed. So we propose to keep the heavier contractor yards, your LaJoys and those kind of things in what's currently called the I-1 zone. We've got a new zone, which is the I-2 zone, which allows contractor yards, but doesn't allow that earth moving storage, and looks at, it's kind of a much lighter intensity. Maybe a good example would be that plumbing contractor who has 10 trucks and maybe he stores some conduit outside, but he's not generating the dust and the noise and the conflict that arises from some of those heavier uses. Oops, sorry about that, wasn't quite finished. And the table down below kind of puts some of that in light. And if you need me to blow that up, let me know. I can see if I can increase that size. But it breaks down some of the uses that occur and within the new zoning district. So right now we have a B1 and a B2. Those basically run the Route 1 corridor and also along Main Ave. And the new zoning we're looking at is recommending really consolidating those into one zone, because it doesn't make sense to have a business 1 and business 2. So the plan recommends, certain uses that were identified as, either issues or ones we needed to really get a good handle on, and where they can be allowed in the future, whether that's allowed through a zoning permit, which is basically someone over the counter can come in and obtain the permit, whether they need to go for what's called site plan approval, which is basically the commission looking at things a little more diligently than over the counter, looking at the traffic and the parking a little more closely and making sure it aligns with the neighborhood. Whereas the special permit's a higher threshold where there is discretion on whether this use or this intensity is appropriate for this site. So in the back of the plan in Appendix A, there are some detailed maps that show the proposed rezoning of the areas. The left-hand side, what you see here is the existing zoning. So we're looking at South Norwalk. Here's Martin Luther King Drive. You have South Main that runs on the other side. And I just want to point out a few things just to give you a flavor of what we're looking at. So in this area through here is where we see a lot of our current heavy industrial uses, where you have LaJoys, you have some of the bigger contractor yards. So a change you'll see when you look at the proposed zoning is that area of the very heavy industrial has shrunk quite a bit. And I should know in a few days what those actual square footages are by acres. We're just waiting for the files to come over from the consultant so we can run those numbers. And what we've proposed is for these areas, so right now this is currently zoned at the heavy industrial, is proposed to drop it down to that industrial 2, which we think makes a nice transition from the heavy back over to when you get to the east and to the south, which is more residential in nature. Also, just to point out a couple of things over here.
Steve, real quick, how many businesses will be non-conforming after this change?
I don't have a number for that. I can get that for you. I don't have a number top of my head.
Okay.
That's easy for us to pull once we get the GIS files.
Got it. Please.
Hey, Steve?
Yeah.
Just a quick question. I see on the new zoning map, you don't have any marine commercial. That's not going to be effective though, right? Is it just
no? That's why we took it out. And if you see up here, it says area for further study. So that's directly being looked at in the waterfront study. So
okay,
no
so
change
that is
now.
going to be affected in some sort of way eventually.
Right. Yeah, that's going to get looked at right now, and then recommendations on that to come in the future. Just
you.
a couple other areas to flag on here for importance. The Rockland Road area, which really doesn't have any direct conflicts with residential, already has areas that are pretty heavily used by heavy industrial users. So we're proposing to take that out of what's now restricted industrial and put that in the I-1. So that way those businesses will actually become conforming as opposed to making them non-conforming. Boughton Street, which does have some pretty large contractor yards. In their visits to the sites, the consultants flagged Boughton Street in particular as a problem for truck traffic, just recognize the narrowness of the road, saying, it's really not ideal for that kind of traffic. But, there are a lot of industrial users, so it's recommending dropping it down to the lighter industrial use, the I2. And we're also recommending having this area, which is currently zoned residential, convert to the I2. If you go out there, there's a lot of mishmash of uses, whether it goes from industrial to residential, back and forth. So we think it might make sense, and just to keep those cohesive, to put those in industrial too. Another significant thing on this map, when you look up in the Lexington.
Steve?
Yep.
Steve, can you just go back and explain that one more time? So you said this yellow part, I know we had a conversation the other day, just
This right here?
explain that again. Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
right now,
that's on Boughton Street, right?
that's on the east side of Boughton Street.
Mhm.
Yeah. So right now, sorry, this thing keeps popping up for convenience sake. Right now, that's just zone residential. It's got a residential zoning designation. Based on the majority of the uses, and that's kind of like in this block of properties in here, the majority of those are commercial, but there are some residential uses in there. We're recommending the city consider rezoning that to industrial too. Now, the same thing would happen as happens over here. So if there's a residential use over there, it would become non-conforming, potentially non-conforming, I should say. It doesn't mean it goes anywhere. And same thing with these, to Mr. Kitey's questions about the properties that become non-conforming. They can.
And are there houses there though? Are there houses in this yellow area that you pointed to? What's there
There
now?
are some, and I can, I'm happy to go back and I can map those for you so you know
Okay.
which ones are which. Anytime you make something non-conforming, and this is important to note because this question comes up a lot, we're not taking anybody's property away from them. We're taking away the ability to expand the current use. So if you have a contractor yard over here, in this area over here, and you're doing earth processing, and then we rezone it down to the I2 zone, you can continue to operate that business just as you are today. However, you can't expand it any further than what it is today. And if in the future it changes to a more conforming use, you cannot go back to that more intensive use that you were doing previously.
Okay, but I do know, Darlene, that Tom and I were over in that neighborhood the other day, and there are houses throughout that area. So a number of houses kind of up there in Robbins Square and off Robbins Square and on Boughton.
Yep. There's a daycare over there. There's
Yes,
a lot of stuff over there. Yep.
Yeah.
I'll map that and get that back out to everybody. We can probably do that in the next week or so fairly easily. The last area, which I think is pretty significant to mention in this portion of the study area, was the Lexington Ave area, which for the most part, most of the properties in here are residential, but they're not zoned necessarily residential. You have a lot of neighborhood business. And then to the east of that, there's a lot of area that's zoned industrial 1. So we're proposing to rezone most of that to residential. We have one mistake on the map right up at the top of Ely that got inadvertently switched to, which is right here, which we need to put back in the pink category to match up the land use. We'll fix that. And also it's important to point out in like the Olean Street area, there are, which is up through here, that's industrial 1, and we're proposing to downzone that to the industrial 2, which we think is more fitting and will provide a better transition in the neighborhood over the long term. And here's a blow up. Probably would have been a little easier to speak to this this map than the prior one, but as you can see, here's Merritt Street. You come through here, and it's a lot of heavy industrial uses, and we're proposing to switch that to the industrial 2, which we think will be more fitting for the neighborhood. And something to keep in mind, and I had conversations with Ms. Young about this too, is that, these changes won't happen overnight. We're hoping that if we provide the right incentives for things that are better for the neighborhood, that maybe they'll happen more quickly. But, if somebody is intent on using their property as it's currently being used, we can't force them to switch out of that. It's just not, we're not going to get involved with any kind of takings of anybody's property. That's not the intent what we did with this plan.
And to that point though, Ken, I'm sorry. See, I was on another call. I'm sorry, Steve. So folks can then, how does the grandfathering thing work? So are these sites grandfathered in at some point? How does that work
Sure.
with what we're doing now?
So we'll look at just,
Proposing.
if you look at this piece right here, and I don't know what's underneath this parcel, I don't, I don't have an aerial picture of,
Yeah.
but say this was a,
Yeah,
say this was a contractor yard and they had piles 30 feet high and he had 30 trucks in there.
as they
Once it-
do.
Yeah, and they may. So once it's rezoned, it goes to this industrial 2 category, which means he can't add more than what he has there now. So he's allowed to continue to operate his business just as he is today. But in the future, if he says, you know what, they did just rezone this and they provided a few things that I couldn't do here before that maybe make economic sense for me to consider, maybe I'll look at that and then I'll change the use on the property. Maybe it's something that's less controversial, less conflicting with like the residential properties across the street. So that's kind of the intent. This could happen over 10 years. It could happen over 5 years. It could take longer, but the idea is hopefully put the right tools in place to expedite that process.
I guess, I mean, Darlene, correct me if I'm wrong. Were you also asking if title of the property changes hands? Does the new owner
too.
have the, yeah. Can
Yeah.
you speak to that, Steve?
Correct. So the use
Thank you.
goes with the lands regardless of ownership, until they change that use, and that, it's really hard to lose a nonconformity. Basically, you have to pull a permit to say, I'm going from contractor yard to widget factory. Then you have changed the use on that property. But there's lots of things people try to say, well, inactivity and those kind of things, that's really hard to prove and really won't stand up to legal muster, just to give you a heads up.
But how does that work in the reverse? If someone has a residential property, they have a home on that property, but they decide to tear it down and make a contractor yard, right? They
So
can do
that- Yeah, they could if it's in an area, I guess it really doesn't matter what area we look at. So say this parcel right here was a house and it's, and they decide I want to make it a contractor yard. As long as that's an allowed use in that zone, they could do that. It has to be a use allowed in the zone. So hopefully once we change the, get, the final pieces of the puzzle ironed out with the individual parcels and get the configuration where everybody's comfortable, the uses should line up with the new zoning once that goes into effect.
So Steve, we're going to be, like you had mentioned before, almost restrictive with this plan where a lot of the I-1 will now be I-2, but the overall acreage will remain the same. Is that a pretty accurate assessment?
I don't want to say that definitively until I get a chance to run those numbers for you.
Okay.
Like I said, what I can do is we'll map it, and then once we have it mapped, it's easy to just pull the numbers right off the GIS, and I can get you a little summary memo with that and pull some things out to flag the areas where it's where it
Gee,
looks.
I
think-
hate to keep bringing you these meetings, but you think you'll have that information by the next planning committee meeting in November?
I don't see why not. They indicated to us they would get us the data by the end of this week, so I can probably have my staff flush it out a little bit next week. So I can definitely handle that.
I don't know about everyone else, but I'd like to have those missing pieces of the puzzle. As soon
Yeah,
as
and just to look at this a little more closely, the areas where there are changes in terms of downsizing or downzoning, they're not, so this is still industrial over here. It's just not necessarily allowing heavy contractor yards. So a lot of these properties may not become non-conforming at all. In the areas over here where you'll see the large changes, most of these are either, if there are commercial uses in there that would become non-conforming, for the most part, they're packed into majority residential areas and are just going to be legacy industrial uses over time. So we tried to match up, where there were like large swaths of the same types of uses. We tried to keep them congregated together because then like businesses tend to, assist each other and reciprocate business. East Norwalk, not really much anything to comment on here because there's no real change in terms of what's allowed. Just to point out a couple things, this area on the left, we talked about this with the East Norwalk TOD plan. This is I-1 zone. We're proposing it gets knocked down to the I-2 zone, which we think is more appropriate for the area and the types of uses that it lines up with. One thing that was flagged in the East Norwalk TOD plan, which we're recommending the city seriously start looking at, is where can we relocate the DPW garage? Is there a better spot for it where we can open this waterfront up for a better use? We're not talking about WPCA and the wastewater treatment plant, but just where we're keeping the trucks. Is there a better place than this? I think there probably is. I don't know where it is at the moment, but that's something we need to take a closer look at going forward.
But also down there, I mean, you have the Pound, you have further down the road, you've got Lametta's. I mean, there's quite a bit of, but you're saying specifically to the DPW garage?
Right, yeah, and then the other parcels kind of in this grayish color, I guess, that'll all get looked at in the waterfront study and we'll have more specific recommendations in that.
Okay.
Moving north, and this is kind of Main Ave area, Perry Ave up through here, we're actually proposing to upzone this. So this would go from what's in the business 2 zone now to that industrial 2. And we think these areas, based on a lot of the uses in there, might be a good area for some future business growth in the city. So, in some places we take away and some place we give, just based on what we think is appropriate for that given location. Lastly, and this was kind of some legacy parcels. When the West Ave Wall Street plan was redone in 2019 and the zoning was proposed, we left a lot of the small industrial 1 parcels alone in and around where the CBD zone was, knowing we were going to do this study. And after looking at it, it just doesn't make sense for some of these properties to be zoned industrial 1, and we're recommending that they be rezoned to this central business district. I think that those are kind of minor changes overall in that area. So kind of a summary in general. So as I mentioned, there is a reduction in the amount of industrial 1 zone land. Nobody that's operating there currently, if they become non-conforming, is going to be asked to leave or will be forced to leave. They can continue to operate their business as it is today. They just can't expand it. One of the planning conferences I went to took a trip in Brooklyn out to some repurposed industrial areas, and I was talking to their staff about industrial zoning, and they were really adamant about not eliminating areas where these businesses can operate, because you need these support industries for all the other ancillary construction activities that are happening all around. And a lot of them do have, they're job generators in many cases. So we don't want to kick them out of the city, just try to right size where they should be and make sure we have the right uses in the right zones. That speaks also to the second bullet point. And I mentioned before, are there incentives? And we think there are some incentives that are being proposed to get some more appropriate uses on some of these sites, when that involves allowing some additional height in areas, reducing the parking that's currently required for some of these industrial uses to kind of right size it with more appropriate industry standards, and allowing some things on the upper floors to help subsidize that ground floor commercial use. I mentioned we talked a lot, and we'll continue to talk a lot about the types of contractors and where they can go. We've already started kind of working on definitions for those and working with the existing definitions. And I think we'll have a pretty clear package on what those are. And as we progress, I'm happy to come back and share that information with you. In a minute, we're going to talk a little bit more about the industrial waterfront. And I mentioned both the DPW garage and the Norton site. And within the plan, it provides some initial regulatory recommendations and tools on how to reduce impacts if you do raise up the height in certain areas that are in proximity to residential neighborhoods. So last slide, to tonight, I'm talking to you. Next week, I'm talking to the Planning Commission. The week after that, I'll be doing the same presentation to the Zoning Commission. We're taking public comment, just kind of open public comment through early November. Then we'll kind of, finalize a package of zoning amendments, hopefully by the end of the year. And then trying to look at public hearing on some of these things early, I guess it's 2022, and then looking to try to get things wrapped up sometime in March. That's kind of it in a,
Steve,
big nutshell.
Steve, can I ask a question? This is Tom Keegan.
Sure.
What is you were talking about maximum heights before, be it South Norwalk or East Norwalk. What was that maximum height? Is it 85 feet?
Are you talking about proposed?
Yes.
Yeah, so in certain, it's okay if I share screen again? Apparently I'm still sharing screen. Okay. Okay, so if you can see, this shows it a little bit. I can show you the areas. So the industrial 1 proposes to go up to 85. The industrial 2 to 65.
Okay.
And then I think the more central business district areas where we allow that we're targeting the artisan use. I think there's some additional height there, but I have to double check that because I think the existing regulations are pretty conducive to that. So I don't know if there'd be any change in that area, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that does. And
Steve-
in the East, you were showing East Norwalk a bit before, but your concentration was more on South. Where in East Norwalk will it allow for 85 feet specifically? What part?
Nowhere in East Norwalk.
Okay.
So East Norwalk would go to the 65.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah, I know. The consultant was looking at that at first, and I said, don't even put it in a slide. Don't even talk about it. No.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the industrial zone before we move on to the waterfront? No. Steve, before you get going on that, we had no one signed up for public participation, but now we do. I guess folks came late. I know it's a little unorthodox and out of the ordinary, but I think it's almost best that we, seeing that we've already discussed the item that most likely these folks are on to speak about. I want to backtrack and go to public participation. Sabrina, is there anyone signed up to speak?
If they would like to speak, can you please raise your hand? We have Diane Loricella. I'll allow you to talk now. You should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Good evening. Can you folks hear me or see me?
We can hear you. We can't see you though.
Oh, I hope one day we change that. Anyway, good evening. I really want to commend Steve and the consultants and this committee for looking at this and our city for looking at this long overdue review. The only thing I wanted to suggest is that when we started this process out, I remember speaking to the following. Many people have a view of heavy industry as from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The belching smokestacks, the horrible odors, the stench and dust, and the noise. Now, at times, definitely that's what was yesteryear with the inclusion of regulations, both hazardous waste regulations, noise regulations, et cetera. That is not allowed anymore. Unfortunately, when there's not enforcement, we have issues like we have with our heavy contractor yards. So I'm very happy that that's being addressed. But the reason I'm mentioning this is only because I want to make sure that we do not discourage, for instance, with these changes from I-1 to I-2, for instance, could a machine shop still be allowed in Norwalk? If someone wanted to put in a windmill blade manufacturer, not to say that that's in the offing, it probably will go to Bridgeport. Would that be allowed? Lastly, would a microgreen, I do believe this would be allowed, microgreens where there's a lot of water use, where people are indoors putting together a farm, would that be allowed? I believe that would, but what I'm more worried about is the fact that my point is that all of the heavy manufacturing is not necessarily a negative thing. And oftentimes, because of the equipment they use indoors, it is taxed at a higher level. Therefore, number one, you get a slightly more tax from that site. Number two, you relieve the tax burden of the single family property owners. And so I don't want to see us remember the old days. I'd love to make sure that we have enforcement. So I'm thankful that Steve mentioned regulatory controls. We need better enforcement. It's very uneven in many fronts in Norwalk, but heavy industry does not connote belching smokestacks. So I just would love you to, I think we could use some heavy industry, not just for contractor yard issues, but actually machine shops and the like, stamping factories, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lorchella. Anybody
Good
else
job.
signed up?
I'm sorry, good jobs as well. Good paying jobs where people could walk to work. They would not be coming in necessarily from out of town. They would walk to work.
Thank you. Sabrina, anybody else signed up to speak?
Nobody else has their hand raised, so I believe they're just listening in.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And okay, Steve, back to you.
Sure, I can just address Ms. Laura Cella's comment. Can you guys see the charts that are up? Just so it's clear, you can, within the I2, you can do manufacturing. There's no, the kind of the intent is in the I1 is to allow, you know, the more outdoor heavy stuff, but I1 and I2 both allow manufacturing. Unfortunately, yeah, so you can do manufacturing in both those zones, and it actually through site plan review, so it does not even require a special permit. So we're not trying to discourage that. If anything, we're trying to definitely encourage that. This slide here, I don't have a separate presentation for the waterfront study, and I'll go through it kind of quickly just because we are just at the very beginning stages of things. So if you can see the outline, the black outline here, this is like the focus area of the waterfront study. So it looks at, it's looking at Water Street was obviously an area of concern. And then as you progress north, the upper harbor areas and what's going on in some of those properties. So this is really our focus area and study area. We also are cognizant of the fact that changes that are made here affect properties that might be on the other side of the road or not necessarily marine-based property. So we're cognizant of those things, as well as very cognizant of the fact that changes that we make landward affect the waterfront as well. So what we've been doing so far is talking to as many business owners, property owners, folks that use the water, whether it's the marina operators, the boat clubs, the, and I'm gonna use the wrong term, but the like not paddle boating, but like Skull and the rowboats and you know what I'm talking about, those guys. So we've been talking to all of them to understand their needs and uses of the water, conflicts on the water, things that they've identified as issues and problems. So we're getting a good handle on that. One thing that's coming, but kind of the forefront a lot is water quality concerns and things that we can do landward to kind of address that and kind of improve that if possible. So that's kind of been the focus. So we've been actually today, myself and a couple staff were over at the, over talking to the aquarium about things on their end and how they can fit into the big picture. Yesterday, we were over at Bloom Brothers, talking to them about their operation, learning a bit more. And I think there's a real benefit for the city for these conversations because we learned a lot about their operations. And then like, for me, I'm always fascinated by the number of employees are there and the kind of wages that they're getting at these places. And, you know, you learn a lot when you talk to King Industries and O&G about what they're doing there. Divine Brothers. So you understand that there's significant impacts and benefits for the city from these businesses operating in there. So those are like kind of the phase we're at now. What we're going to work on next is we were talking about an online survey mapping exercise that we'd like to put out there for for not only those people, but for the public as well. We did a little bit of this when we did the first phase of the industrial study. What we'd like to do is kind of, we think there's a couple programs that are pretty simple for folks to use, so they can have a map of the waterfront and kind of like put in like, what do they want to see on the waterfront in these areas, and put all that together, and hopefully they can upload pictures of, maybe they visited other areas and that's, I'd love to see this in Norwalk, and how do we get this in Norwalk? And then we got to try to weigh that with the reality of what's on the ground and who owns property and what they want to do with their property. So coming up with the right mix will be very difficult, and I'm sure we'll never be able to fulfill everybody's wishes, but we're going to try to get as much input as we can and come up with something that's, I think lays the groundwork for the future. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet, is that, we're very cognizant of the need for water dependent uses along these properties. We understand that's incorporated into the harbor management plan. We had a 2-hour plus meeting with them last night about this very thing. And we have no intent of eliminating the waterfront uses. We understand the importance of the boating and the marine nature of things to the city and kind of the nature and history of the city. So we're very cognizant of that. We're just trying to come up with, things that can work for everyone, and realizing that not every property owner has that same intent. So that's kind of where that study is at this point.
Hey, Steve, if I could, so you're looking just at the basically inner harbor then. Are you going to be looking at areas like in row 8 in the 5 Mile River where there are a number of marinas and marine uses?
No, we're not looking at that as part of this. We didn't really consider that kind of industrial waterfront. I know there are some marinas over there, but it's not the same look and feel. And the landward uses are in a lot of ways set in stone. We will be dealing with that area as part of the zoning rewrite to try to tighten up some things that have popped up in that area where residents have expressed concern about losing their access to the water or views to the water. So we're going to try to look at tightening up design standards in there, and we'll do that with input from the residents as we go forward.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, excuse me, Steve, you answered my question, I think, but the harbor management plan and all of that will be taken into consideration when you look at what uses there will be for this area, the harbor itself.
Correct. And my staff and the consultant has had that plan for months now. I know my staff has read it. I'm hoping the consultants have as well. I mean, one thing that we've had discussions with the Harbor Management Commission in the past is there's a need to really take a cohesive look at that plan, because they kind of update it in a piecemeal approach, and that kind of works for the moment, but it doesn't work over time. So that's why you got to look at the big picture. So I think that's something that the city should look at, how that's funded and who does that. But that's something that we would recommend.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you, Steve, and I look forward to our updates moving forward.
Sure. Now, I don't know if you want me to update you on the zoning regs rewrite. There's not a ton to add, but I'm happy to do that if you'd like.
Sure, if you got something to add, please.
Sure. So a couple of weeks back, we had the kind of virtual charrette. So it was like four days over about a week where we had different topics that were addressed. And the consultants put the presentations together. All those are now online, obviously on the city's YouTube channel. And some of the mapping exercises, I think, are still up for public input. So if people were still interested, we could do that. And obviously, anybody who has comments on things that they've read, seen, or questions, they can feel free to reach out to me, or there's a portal on the Zone Norwalk site that allows for those kind of comments. So the consultant is kind of taking that back. And right now they're kind of working on a sort of a draft table of contents of how the code will kind of be realized, and also looking at the zoning map that will be kind of the future map going forward. if anybody's looked at the zoning map, it's got way too many zones. There's over 30 zones, which is insane. So we're hoping to get it down into like 15, 18 range at the end of the day, because there's a lot of duplicity in there, or duplicative. Okay, I won't use the word, but a lot of repeat zones. So we looked at a couple tonight. We were talking about the business 1 and the business 2 zone, for example, which is the Route 1 corridor in Main Ave. There's really no difference in the zones. So why do we have 2? There's many areas that, can be consolidated and make more consistent. And I think we'll just make things easier for the public, the development community, and for the city to administer over time. So those kind of where things are at. And once we kind of settle on those things, they'll start working on the code in earnest. The goal is to have a public draft out in the spring, make edits and get it kind of in the final approval stage, hopefully no later than August. And then we have to go through the formal adoption process. So that's kind of where that whole process stands.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve. Okay, everyone, I need to step away now. Mr. Sirianni will be taking over the meeting from this point on for the next 3 items. You'll be handling the first 2 items, and Mr. Badoli is here to speak to you if everyone an update on the RFQ. Sorry about this, but you're in good hands, and I will talk to you all soon. George? Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
John. Good night and good luck with tonight.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on to B, business development and tourism. Number 1, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute all documents to increase the contract amount for marketing services between the city of Norwalk and Dornberg Callenbach Advertising LLC, $50,000 to execute an economic development focused marketing campaign and website. Sabrina, you said you're going to be handling this one?
Yes, I will be handling this one. So in fiscal year 21, so not this fiscal year, but the previous fiscal year, the council approved $50,000 for an economic development strategy to really draw businesses to Norwalk. Up until this point in time, we've been internally as a team looking up resources that we have available via, financial resources that we might have available, what the state has available. And we've also been looking at different economic development websites that really showcase cities well to really come up with the perfect scope and mixture for what we're really looking for this. You might know DKA from the Visit Norwalk campaign. They've been doing a fantastic job. They're very sufficient when it comes to Norwalk. They've done a ton of research. They've been here a ton of times. They've done websites like this already. So we're hoping to just increase their contract $50,000 so that they can take what they've already learned and really just implement it into what we're looking for a business focused site, which will include not only resources for current businesses, but ones who are hoping to relocate to Norwalk, open a business for the first time, or even expand their business. So not only will it have all those resources and programs that we have locally, but it will also have, a widget that shows what spaces are available, things that might be important to employees, like places to live, transportation elements that may be important to businesses as well. So all of those different things will really be packaged on a cohesive website where applicants will be able to apply for certain programs, ask questions, be able to reach out to the business development and tourism team, as well as the chamber, to really have a holistic focus to make a really successful story, not only for Norwalk, but also for a new business or a business that's looking to expand here. So we're really excited about it, and we hope you guys are too.
Sounds interesting. With this new program, are they going to have some sort of an outreach for other companies, like anybody that's in the market of looking to open or move? So
Yes.
It's going to expand further than, like, obviously Norwalk, Fairfield County, a little bit further.
Correct. So normally our marketing strategy goes to a 50-mile radius. That's really to consider driving and commute distances. That's a little bit farther than we're looking for, but a lot of times you're doing that 50-mile radius because you're covering all of New England and some of the southern parts of New York. So that's kind of really what we'll be targeting once we have everything up and running. And then additionally, I'm looking into lead generation software at this point in time as well, so we can hopefully really get leads and direct them to that site so that we can actually go from start to finish, like infancy to brand new business in Norwalk, moving from elsewhere. But we're also really focused on entrepreneurship as well. A lot of our businesses, as I'm sure you are all aware, are actually from folks that have either lived here at one point in their life or currently live here. So we're currently working on a separate strategy as well that support those folks so that they can open successful businesses in Norwalk as well and have the resources to do so.
What's the term of the agreement?
We have them currently for marketing services for the next three, it's a 1-year agreement with 2-year options. So for the next 3 years, we would then have to go out to RFP again unless we get separate approval to just continue with the same consultant group. We did a shorter term because if there is ever a point in time when we can take this in-house, currently we cannot. But after all the websites are built out and all that technical stuff is done, and it's really just content creation and then social media, that's something we could then take in-house. So we're hoping that once this agreement time is up, that we can then transfer to an in-house strategy that doesn't require so much technical assistance.
Thank you.
Is there any other
Yeah,
questions?
I had a question. Hi, Sabrina. So what does the market look like in Norwalk as far as space that's vacant or available, I should say?
So across Fairfield County, not just us, there's large vacancies in office space. That's mainly due to COVID. People working from home, people having hybrid models where you're hoteling for a few days a week and then half of your other staff comes in. So you need half of the amount of space that you needed previously. Our Class A isn't doing the greatest, but like I said, that's a Fairfield County trait. Our smaller spaces, though, are doing a lot better than they were during COVID, number one, but also a little bit better than we were doing previous to COVID as well. And I think that talks to a lot of what our market really looks like, where we're really in that we don't have a ton of space like Bridgeport and Hartford and Stamford have those high-rise Class A office spaces. We really just don't have stock of that besides Merit 7. So we're really a home for like those startup type businesses where you're looking at like 25 to 50 employees. So we're really filling those up well, and our retail spaces are starting to fill up again as things, become more normal. But the Fairfield County market just in general is really taking a hit for kind of Class A office, your traditional like large set employees. And I think that's just a trend, not even just in Fairfield County, but nationally with, working from home and everything that we've now experienced post-COVID.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions? All right, seeing none. And Sabrina, I know in the past with other companies, we kind of focused more on the, Sono area, Wall Street area. With this contract, it encompasses the entire city, correct? I mean, you
Yes.
mentioned the Merit 7 building, so they will take some sort of front on helping promote those buildings, helping fill those up as well, right?
Correct. And all the widgets that end up being fed into the website for available space, it includes all space available in Norwalk that people have advertised. So that could be, something on Connecticut Ave, something on Westport Ave, something, in East Norwalk that might be vacant, those types of things. So it's not just secluding it to our downtowns. It's really a large swath of where people want to locate. Some of the programs that we do have focus more on downtown areas, specifically the state programs usually focus on certain geographies when it comes to improvements to property. But in general, this website will be marketing the entire city and then specific spaces within the city that makes sense for the larger companies, but also for the smaller ones. So obviously Merit 7 is going to have a presence. Sono 50 will have a presence, but also the smaller kind of commercial spaces like on Washington Street, on Westport Ave, that might be vacant, will also have a space on the website.
Awesome.
Well, when do you expect to have it up and running?
They launched our Visit Norwalk site in about 2 to 3 months. So I'm hoping this will be even shorter, around the 2-month range, because we have a lot of the information that will need to be on the site already ready to go. So it's not a lot of content building on their side. It's really just technical website building. And we have a lot of examples of what we want it to look like. So I think that will go a long way when it comes to designing as well. So I think we'll be at about 2-month range.
Great.
Sabrina, what was our original contract with this group? Was it 50?
Our
Or
original
100?
contract was $100,000 to create
Was
the
100?
Yep, it was creating the whole Visit Norwalk brand and including all marketing associated with that brand as well.
Okay, any other questions? All right, on,
Well,
do we
do
vote
I
on
want a
these
motion?
together, or do we vote on them individually? I'm assuming individually, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
George,
so
George, you
all
want
in
a
favor for
motion?
B1? Sorry, oh yeah, did anybody make a motion? Thank you, Mr. Livingston. All right, so voting on B1, all in favor? It's unanimous. Great. B2, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute a contract. Sorry?
Authorize the Harry.
I've been saying that a lot lately, okay? It's been a long week. Authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute a contract with Studio 162 LLC, Lauren Clayton, to complete 2 Martin Luther King Jr. corridor art installations in a total amount not to exceed $26,500, account noted. Would anybody like to move that item? Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. All right, are you taking this one too, Sabrina?
Yes. So I came to you guys last month to present the MLK artwork that included the staircase and the mural on the pumping station. Originally, we were unsure if we would need a contract in place. Turns out we need a contract in place. So here I am again, and it's really covering maintenance, term, and licensing of the artwork that will be placed, basically not only to protect the city, but to protect the artist, and also to delineate from an insurance perspective what happens if the piece becomes damaged. So we have both a licensing agreement and a terms agreement from the legal department now that the mayor will have to execute, and the artist will also have to execute to move this project forward.
Is this in addition to what we authorized before? Or?
No, last meeting, it was just informational. We
Okay.
haven't authorized anything for this at this point in time.
Sabrina, when is this gonna start? So once we approve this, if this gets approved, when do you expect the project to begin?
So it will go to council on the 12th, and they're looking to start the 13th. So as soon as possible, and it should, given the weather, we give or take, it should take about 3 weeks if the weather is good for all 3 weeks. But that's kind of her timeline at this point in time.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, all in favor? It's unanimous.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Sabrina.
All right, moving on to C, redevelopment, Webster Street RFQ update. I believe we have with us Mr. Bedoli tonight.
How you doing, everybody?
Do I have to move that item? I do, right? Would anybody like to move that? Or?
It's
It's just
fine.
an update, so,
It's just an update. There's no action on it, right?
nope. Okay, you got the floor, Brian.
All right, thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all. I just wanted to provide a brief update on the Webster Street lot RFQ. If you recall, a few weeks back, I had sent an email to all of council, just sort of notifying you that we had put out a request for qualifications for a potential developer for the Webster Street lot. I know this is a project that's sort of been on the radar for a number of years. So we've been working really closely with the city to sort of develop a request for qualifications proposal, really as a first step, and identifying what the current market is for development at the Webster Street lot. So we issued that back on September 17th. The idea is to really pose the question to the market, provide all the information that's been developed to date in terms of plans going back to 2004, again in 2016, various issues and constraints that were identified, and sort of really just polling the market to see what sort of interest level may exist and asking for an initial concept in terms of what people are thinking that the site could be used for based on the marketability. And then also taking a look at some of the key constraints like parking, which is obviously a big one, some of the easement issues and things of that nature, and just really putting forth some ideas and an interest to work with the city to try to sort of navigate these challenges. So we've had the way it's structured is, we're looking for a firm or a group of firms to actually establish a list based on their qualifications, based on their experience. And then from there, work with you all, work with the city and try to figure out how best to, and if it even makes sense to develop a request for proposals as the next phase. We had a very good meeting actually today. We held a pre-bid conference and we actually had 20 attendees. So that's outside of city. So we had 20 different firms that were interested. So I was really pleased with that. We advertised nationwide. We try to get our reach, direct mailers and all of that as far as possible to really just generate some new interest and competition in the area. So the plan is that we're hoping to receive proposals back on November 5th. And, again, the idea is just to start polling, get an idea for who may be interested, what kind of things they're thinking, and then we could continue the discussion from there. I'll happy to answer any questions. I just wanted to kind of provide a general update so you knew what was going on in that regard.
Hey, Brian, are we giving them a general scope and size idea of what we're looking for in that area, or are we just allowing them to come with their ideas, given the space?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. So we basically, there was an RBA study that was done in 2015 that had some very more specific mixed use recommendations, the residential commercial retail program. The way it's been written in the RFQ, and you could access, just so you know, you could access the RFQ on our website and everything's up there that's been provided to the developer, so you could kind of see what was going through their heads. But we gave some general ideas, but we did say, if you have other ideas, we want to hear them, and we want to know what you need to make them work, or what you're thinking to see, see what's actually out there, see if there's any creative solutions that we may not have thought of previously.
Now, I know it's still pretty early and you said just had this meeting. You said roughly 20 people have already showed interest, which is great. It's good to see a large number come in and not the same companies continuously coming back. You can give us a couple of names, or is it still too early?
I mean, in terms of who was there on the list, I just deferred to the actual video. We actually posted a video of the whole site.
Oh,
I wouldn't
okay.
be able to name them offhand here, but we basically recorded the entire meeting, and that's available on the website. So you could get the whole cast of characters and all, the questions that were asked there.
Oh, even better. Fantastic. Any questions?
Brian, I'm sorry if I could. Were there any particular questions raised in your meeting that struck you?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of them is what I sort of expected, right? On the site, there's a requirement to provide 650 public parking spaces in perpetuity. So that's obviously a large number when you talk about the financial construction of that large of a parking deck.
Right. In
In addition to, providing parking for whatever development program you're proposing. So you're talking about a large parking structure to accommodate that development. So that was a key question. And sort of the response that, we provided is bring your ideas and bring to the table what you think you need to make it work. And the whole point of this is partnership and trying to figure out what subsidy may be available at the state, the federal level. We're really just trying to find a partner that we feel comfortable working with, and that we could begin negotiating some of these larger site constraints that are encumbered on the property. So that was one of them. What else was striking? I think, in general, I think people were interested in the process. I think that was the key thing. And they kind of, I could tell, I felt like there was an appreciation for leaving it somewhat open-ended and letting them have some sort of creative capacity in terms of what it, and market focus on it, rather than trying to stamp something down on the front end and then have them fit through that, whether it's a circle through a square hole, for lack of a better analogy. So I think that was of interest of the group as well.
So with the 650 parking spots you noted, is that what we're sort of, for lack of a better word, contractually obligated to provide the various resident or businesses nearby, like 50 Washington?
Yeah, that's actually encumbered on the land records. So that is contractual obligation.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other questions? All right. Well, it's still early on, but it's great to see so much interest in the project. Finally starting to move a little bit forward. Obviously,
And Councilman Serenides, I just appreciate us being informed early on. I like the idea
I
of
was just
knowing
getting to that next.
early on as
If you could
well.
just
So
keep us
I
on
hope
the-
this trend continues, at least of engaging and sharing of information early in the process. And I will go to the video to see what transpired at the meeting.
Yeah,
Well-
great. And I think, yeah, and that's the hope. So once we get proposals back, we want to engage with the group as much as we can and sort of work through it together, because it's a big project in an important area. And I think, the better we could stay coordinated, the better the project will be.
Agreed. All right, well, Councilwoman Young beat me to that last statement about keeping us informed. So I guess that's it for tonight. If there's nothing else anybody wants to add, I'll authorize the Mayor Harry W. Grilling to adjourn the meeting, or that was a joke, guys. That was a joke. Is there anything else, or? Okay, Brian, thank you very much for the update, and I'll look forward to looking at that video as well.
All right, great. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
If
Brian.
that's it.
Bye.
Have a good night, Brian. If that's it, would anybody like to make the motion? Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. Motion to adjourn. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Night.
You too. Good night.
Good night.
Night.